Yeah, hello to the viewers. My name is Sisi Eklonate, and I am responsible for the project management of the Interreg Europe project Dialogue within the Lower Saxon Ministry for Federal and European Affairs and Regional Development. And with me today is my dear colleague Christoph Lahner, who is working in the strategy department of our ministry and who helped shaping very important processes of stakeholder participation within our institution. So hello, Christoph. Maybe you can introduce yourself and your field of work or your role within the ministry to us very quickly.
My name is Christoph Lahner, as Sisi said, and I'm desk officer here since February in the Department for Regional Development, but therefore for strategy, of course. And one of my tasks was to coordinate together with our head of department the EU funding strategy for Lower Saxony from 2018 to 2020. And right now I'm working on funding programs for urban development, regional development, which we are developing right now in our unit.
Thank you, Christoph. So thank you, first of all, for agreeing to participate in this interview. And as we can see from your introduction, you helped shaping quite a few important processes of stakeholder participation in our ministry. And now I would find it interesting to hear from you. Why do you think stakeholder participation plays such an important role in our ministry?
I think, or we think, that it's very important to get in touch with each other and to learn from each other. Regarding the European funding system and the federal funding system, we think it's very important to participate with stakeholders because usually these funding programs addresses nearly all parts of society. For example, in economical issues, social issues, climate change. And and taking this, for example, we do some networking events and events on networking and good practices in our own funding systems as well. For example, and we have a website with good practices from projects, both on European funding projects and federal funding projects. It's just to learn from each other.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. And as we've already mentioned, you were involved in developing the Lower Saxon EU funding strategy. And can you quickly describe the influence of the strategy on the new funding period and the role of stakeholder participation for the design of the strategy?
Yeah, of course. I think the influence on the funding periods, on the coming funding period 2021 to 2027 is quite big because our funding strategy addresses the complete European funding system for Lower Saxony, which is the EFRD, the European Fund for Regional Development, the ESF, the European Social Fund, and the EAFRD, the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development. And this is quite amount, around 700 million in the ERDF and 250 million in the ESF and 1.4 billion euros in the EFRD for the next 7 years. So seeing that, we think the strategy which addresses these funding altogether, the influence is quite big, and we wanted to implement this strategy to develop a broadly accepted funding landscape and to apply funding as efficiently and well coordinated as possible in Lower Saxony. And we want to implement a funding environment that fosters the efficient exhaustion of all funding resources. So not just the three European funding systems I talked about, as well, for example, direct European programs like Horizon, Direct, and so on. And of course, we want to simplify funding as much as possible, which is, of course, quite difficult. And yes, for this, we need the stakeholders and the input. We need them and their input to get a broadly accepted funding landscape. And of course, we want to hear the demand side of the funding programs to develop a very efficient funding program and funding instruments.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you, Christoph, for sharing your viewpoint and especially shedding light on the ideas behind the Lower Saxon EU funding strategy. And I think we are all looking forward to evaluating the impact on the new funding period. And since it has been designed through a very holistic process of stakeholder participation, I'm convinced it's a great example for successful stakeholder participation and as a best practice to share with the dialogue stakeholders. So thank you again, and thank you to the viewers.
Thank you.